Keanu Reeves has got to be one of the most versatile actors out there. Pretty much any role he plays is like, different in each film that he appears in. Whether it's an action role, dramatic role, or a comedic role, it's always different. He can play pretty much any part. Like, in regards to action, films like, Speed, Point Break, and of course there's the Matrix series, and this film called Johnny Mnemonic. He appeared in that in 1995. 4 years before he, starred in the Matrix series. In regards to dramatic roles, he appeared in the film Dangerous Liaisons, and he was also in Francis Ford Coppola's take on Dracula, another favorite of mine. And like his best dramatic role of all time has got to be Matt in River's Edge, the 1986 teen thriller. One of my favorite films of all time. I think that film is spectacular. It's, badass and it's very grim. Considering that it was based on the real life murder of a teenage girl by her boyfriend. And the film is just so intense, and like the stars are just absolutely, and the soundtrack is pretty good, lots of heavy metal, Slayer and Hallows Eve. Pretty good for the flick. And but we all gotta face facts. We can never forget his role as, Ted Theodore Logan in the Bill and Ted movies. As you can see, I have a 2-pack of this that I bought from Target back in summer 2008. These movies are absolutely, they are classics. Not too many, movies are made like this nowadays. In regards to comedies. Although they made a third Bill and Ted, just a few months ago, but I haven't seen it yet, and kind of curious about that one. But like I said, these movies are absolutely classics. But between the two actors, portraying Bill and Ted, Keanu Reeves got the most recognition, while Alex Winter, who plays Bill, one of the only things that I actually ever seen him in was The Lost Boys as one of David's gang members. Marco was his name in the film. But he has appeared on an episode of Amoeba Music, so he's not that obscure in regards to, actors or whatever. But like I said, this and Back to the Future, this, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, that's a comedy classic. And Bogus Journey was okay. It was kind of bizarre, but, I thought it was like, just as good for what it was. Kind of like, how I said that, The Crow, City of Angels was good for what it was, but could never top the original Crow. But anyway, what's even more memorable about these movies are the soundtracks. Both movies can obviously, because they're both metalheads, they're well, before I get into that, one of the main inspirations for the concept for Bill and Ted was Sean Penn's role as Spicoli in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. And they, possess like the personality and like the surfer lingo. Hey, dude, shit like that. And of course, they're like the main inspirations for Wayne's World. But anyway, so about the soundtracks, but like I said, both movies contain soundtracks from heavy, music from heavy metal bands, from the 80s. But like the main differences between those soundtracks is that the first one had like a bunch of like obscure rock and metal bands on the soundtrack, while the second one had more like well-known bands. Like the first one, a lot of the band, like the majority of bands on, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure soundtrack you probably like have never heard of. Like the only, probably the only, you know, band and on that soundtrack that you would know of is Extreme. You know, that hair metal band from the early '90s. You know, they've well, no, from the late 2000s, the late '80s. Sorry. Um, their song "Play with Me" is what appears in the movie and on the soundtrack. It appears in the film where, like, you know, the historical figures that Bill and Ted have rounded up for their history project. They're like creating havoc at the local mall in San Dimas. But yeah, that's like the only like well-known band on that soundtrack. But like on the soundtrack to Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, it has more like well-known bands like Megadeth, Slaughter, Winger, uh, like Steve Vai, and Kiss is on it. Their song "God Gave Rock and Roll to You" that appears in the end credits, and like and of course Primus is on the soundtrack. Oh, and Faith No More is also on it too. Primus is actually the one of the bands that appears in the Battle of the Bands competition towards the end of the movie, and I guess they were like practically very, you know, not totally well known at the time, so that's why they appeared in that film. But one band that I would have to say is like one of the most underrated, like one band that I consider to be incredibly obscure out of all those bands on the Bogus Journey soundtrack is this band. This is a band called Love on Ice. They're a kind of like, you know, a hard rock group. Like, you know, I don't know if they're like hair metal or because like they got like similar sound to like Dokken and like RATT, but see, because this band is like so obscure, it like barely gives like too much like so much information on Wikipedia. They just say that they're like an American rock band. This is like their only album in existence. Uh, NUDE from 1992 through Interscope Records, which is actually the record company that produced the Bogus Journey soundtrack. And I was scrounging through Tech Noir Records, you know, like last year, and like I just so happened to, you know, come across this album, like looking through the rack, and like because I used to own the soundtrack to Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, that's kind of actually how I came across this band. Like I forget what the song was called on Bogus Journey, but that song does not appear in this album. And like I said, this is the only album in existence. This band has practically fallen off the face of the earth, but I'd still recommend it. It is like they are, like I said, they're kind of like Dokken and RATT, and like also they kind of have like a Saigon Kick sound to it. You know, I wouldn't say that they're like, you know, Poison or Twisted Sister or Quiet Riot or anything like that. They're more like, you know, the lesser known, well, lesser hurt, like, you know, stuff that you would barely hear on like any like hard rock stations. You know, but I really enjoy this band. You know, I was blown away once I popped this into my stereo, and you know, this is just so. There isn't like a specific single off this album, but you know, pretty much all the songs on this are pretty awesome. My favorite off this is "Foot in the Grave." You know, just the title just sounds really weird, but that's a track 8, obviously, but and it's got like a very like weird, you know, cover. As you can see, it's like oh, sort of, it looks like you know, something that, you know, kind of like an African art type thing. It's pretty funny, and no, it's actually pretty cool. But yeah, like I said, this band has like completely fallen off the face of the earth, and they have like before like releasing this album, you know, this album came out a year after the Bogus Journey soundtrack came out, and like they actually, you know, released a EP or a demo, you know, before, you know, releasing this. The song that was on Bogus Journey actually appears on that demo, but that demo only has like 4 or 5 other songs, and like so yeah, just one demo CD and just one album altogether. That's basically all they've ever made. But I'd still take a gander. I'd still, you know, I'd still check this band out. You know, this they're if you are like into, you know, 80s hard rock and hair metal and, you know, that shit, if you're into like, you know, the bands I mentioned, obviously, and like if you like I would check this band out. You know, they're kind of like I said, they're like other, they're also kind of like Warrant, although they barely like they have like they don't sound anything like, you know, no song on this album sounds like Cherry Pie or anything like that. But anyway, so if you're like a total hard rock fan from the 80s, you know, if you like to go back to like when VH1 was, you know, doing hard rock videos back in like the 80s and early 90s, I would check this one out. This whole album gives you like a total 80s, you know, nostalgia trip like feel to it. But even though this, like I said, this album was released in 92, but it sounds like it was, you know, made in the 80s. But yeah, Love on Ice, their album Nude, like I said, released in 1992 through Interscope Records. Thanks for watching.